Hey everybody, welcome to the Real Talk podcast. Today's show, we are talking about real estate with two gentlemen who spend a fair amount of time, I think it's fair to say, thinking about that topic.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought in Tyler as well to co-host this episode. So we got him here on Zoom, and then the three of us live and in person in the studio. So should be a fun one. Hope you people enjoy. We're going to talk, everything real estate. Probably get into money a little bit. How sound is it? We're in some interesting, tough times right now. Economically, high interest rates. It can be tough to get ahead, tough to stay afloat.
You're coming on hard times there, Lucas.
I'm feeling the pinch, man. I'm on a variable, so it sucks. It sucks in a big way. So
I feel your pain.
Yeah, you know it, Brent. So. Anywho, so Brent Vanderwoude and Mark Krikke, welcome to the show, boys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe if you want to just introduce yourselves, your background a little bit, how you got into real estate. Brent, you've been here before, so we'll go to Mark first.
Well, my name's Brent, and my name's Mark. So we along with my wife Kirsten, we run Joy Hill Property Management. So we mainly manage short and medium-term rentals for investors, and we're real estate investors as well. And we're looking at the U.S. market actually now. Not big fans of the Canadian market, especially for short and midterm rentals. But we're in real estate. We like talking about it, and we also love macroeconomics. So kind of zooming out from real estate, looking at the bigger economic picture. And that's something we talk about a lot on the Team Stewards show.
Being a geek
with Brent. Yeah, and a nerd.
Yeah.
Nice. How about yourself, Brent?
Yeah, so I'm Brent Vanderwoude. I run a company called Good Stewards, Inc., and obviously that comes from a Christian worldview where we try to help families, investors, people who are looking to access real estate as an investment, to steward their wealth and use real estate as a vehicle to do that. So we basically help people source investment properties and opportunities, and then do the development work. A lot of the times when we're sourcing an investment opportunity, there's more dwelling units that need to be added, or there's some sort of development that needs to happen. So we jump in on that process and we help clients with that. And then we also do tenant placements and management at the end of the day. So source, develop, launch is kind of our three buckets for our services.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it only for like big money players, or like can normal people get in, or how does that work?
Well, yeah. So I think our vision is to try and assist people who aren't necessarily thinking about this topic, especially families and people who have never made an investment decision to get in for the first time. That's kind of our focus. And part of probably what we'll talk about today is just the impact of inflation. Like you started off the top, people feeling the pinch, not really knowing where to turn. We're trying to provide a bit of education around what's kind of going on in the real estate market in the world at large. Mark talked about macroeconomics, looking at some of those factors, and then how can we make wise decisions and help people who are more or less getting railroaded over by inflation to invest and to get into the market. Right. And to benefit from that. And part of it too is to try and benefit our communities, right? Obviously, if you grow your wealth individually, you can help yourself and your family, but you can also help the broader community and be a bigger blessing to other people around. So
right.
That's kind of our focus.
Okay.
So.
And that education, I mean, obviously that would happen if you're working one-on-one with clients, but you guys also have the Two Stewards podcast as well, which you do on a weekly basis. Now that's mostly like real estate based, but you guys probably do touch on macroeconomics and some current events on occasion, with the odd dad joke here or there.
Only every episode.
Yeah.
There is a lot of tangents.
Yes.
Let's just say.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to understand real estate in general, you need to kind of zoom out a little bit, right? A lot of people don't. A lot of people will buy, and this is how my wife and I started too. Like, I think it's a good idea to buy another house, right? An investment property. I've seen other people do that. We should do that without really understanding why. But then when you really get into it, you want to understand, like, why is it a good idea? Like, is it a good idea?
Sure, yep.
If it is, why is it?
Mm-hmm.
And then what are the factors that actually influence it? And to understand that, you need to kind of zoom out a little bit. And you can look at trends like local trends like immigration. And we've talked about this a fair bit between Brent and myself, right? Supply and demand, immigration, how that affects supply and demand, ideal locations for real estate investing. So you're kind of getting out wider. But then, why do house prices go up? Because that's usually why people will buy real estate, right?
Yep.
We're very focused on cash flow, but a lot of people will just buy it because prices go up, and they always have and they always will.
Yep.
Like, okay, they have. Are they going to continue? And so why would they continue, right? And then we start looking at things like inflation and our money system. So it's sort of an inevitable, if you really want to get into real estate and understand that, and other hard assets, why does our system work the way it does?
Right.
And then it always leads to bigger questions, right? Like, is it right?
Yeah.
What is the state of our money system? Do we have sound money?
Mm-hmm.
And you probably have to stop me before I go on a tangent.
No,
but
that's fair.
I think it's sort of inevitable once you really dive into real estate. Most investors eventually kind of zoom out a little bit just to understand, because if you're making a big investment, which real estate usually is, you want to be sure that you are doing the right thing.
You have to substantiate that with some real data, real information, and look at what trends are happening, and then know why you're making that decision, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's a big move.
Yeah, because there's risk involved too, right?
Yep.
So you talk about investing. Every time you make an investment, you're really just committing to something, right? You're taking your hard-earned money or your time, and you're saying, you know what, I'm going to make an investment, which essentially just means I'm going to commit to something, and I'm going to focus on that endeavor, and I expect there's going to be a return. But if you're going to do that, there's obviously risk involved too, right? And you might not get the result you thought you would. So you want to de-risk that by learning about the system, educating yourself, and that's some of the groundwork for the education that we put out.
Right on. Okay. So I want to jump to the macro that you were talking about there, Mark, and hit on a point you mentioned. So I don't know exactly how old you are. I don't want to take a guess live on the show here.
See, we haven't brought that up on our show yet. It's just a mystery.
Yeah. So
but he looks a lot like Kelvin on the picture.
Yes, he's got the long.
John
Anyone watching on
We're getting there.
Yeah.
He's almost as old as John Kelvin. So.
I feel it's safe to say 35 plus, maybe 40 plus. I'll go so as far as to say. So
maybe,
he's not leaving the show, so we'll continue. Anywho, but you mentioned with you and your wife, you were like, okay, let's get a second house. This seems like kind of a no-brainer, right? You didn't put a ton of thought into it, at least initially, and then you kind of learned as you went over time. Yeah. Now, for folks my age and especially younger too, like we don't have that luxury today at all. Like it's very much like if you want to get into real estate, you have to be very calculated, and you have to like do a lot of research just to figure out how you can get your first house. Never mind getting a house after that and whatnot. So, do we want to just jump into a bit of the macro situation and with a focus maybe more on the youth side of things and say like, okay, if someone's listening, they don't own a house, they're a younger person, single, newly married for a couple of years, whatever. How do you get into the real estate market in this day and age, particularly here in Southern Ontario, where it's quite difficult?
So it also applies to like parents whose kids. Like,
yes.
Right. Parents are in a situation, the same thing, right?
Yeah. Do you want to help your kids?
Yeah. Do you want to help your kids? So,
is that a smart move? I know. Yeah.
Yeah. And from a young person's perspective, I mean, you're thinking about your kids as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we're assuming a Christian worldview here where you've got a nuclear family where you've got a man and a woman get together and they're going to have children at some point.
Yeah.
And then, you're thinking about the future. So, I mean, to start off, you want to go back to stewardship.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason, like just how your worldview informs your actions. Right.
Yeah.
So if we take the view that we are stewards, so that everything that we have is a gift, and that starts off with our talents, right? As you're a child, you grow, you learn, you develop your talents and figure out where your expertise is and how you can best use that and how you can best serve God. Right. And part of that is just using the talents that you have and the gifts that you've been given to the best of your ability. That glorifies God in itself.
Yep.
Right. Just doing that. And then later on, as you get older, right. And now you're talking about maybe a young couple who wants to get into real estate. Is it proper to get into real estate? Is that a
Sure.
good use of resources? Is that stewardly? So our theme or our thesis is that, yes, it is an excellent use of your resources because of the system that we have. And I won't get into it too much right now, but basically we live in an inflationary environment where money loses its value constantly. So Robert Kiyosaki, not a Christian, but he has said very bluntly, savers are losers. And while that's a little bit blunt and harsh, it's kind of true, because if you save up money and just keep saving it up, it will lose value every year, at least the rate of inflation. And it's, especially when you're talking about real estate, that rate of inflation has been much higher than, let's say, the price of eggs or the price of gasoline, right? If you're saving up for a house, some people have had houses just go out of reach because they had their savings one year, and in COVID, house prices went up 30% year over year, right? Just made it unattainable for some people. So that's sort of our framework, where we're talking about using your resources and the gifts that you have been given, and that includes your talents, but also your money, wisely. And we think it is wise. You look like you're about to say something.
Well, no, so I just want to clarify that. So basically, that the gap to get in the initial like jump into the market, it's fair to say that has increased substantially over the last few years, because
that's why people
because
are
of the point,
right?
You're right about the saving. And just to break that down so it's super clear, like if you need to save, I don't know, whatever, let's say you needed like 20, let's just use an easy number, $50,000 for like a down payment or something like that, but then the market goes up 25% in 1 year, and you had like 40 or something, but now it's 25% of 50, whatever, like it's going up. You're not gonna be able to save that much that quickly, because your money is losing, let's say, whatever, 6, 7, 8% a year on inflation. I mean, now officially it's down, what is it, like 3 or 4, somewhere in that range right now, allegedly, in the basket of goods that they choose to serve us. But so anyways, just to make that point clear, it's the gap seems to be increasing, and it is difficult to jump in. But go ahead with what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just looking at a chart here. The average household income, what does it take to buy the average home in Canada? So in around 1980, that was about 3 times the average household income. That was the price of a house, sorry. Really? Was about 3 times your average income.
Wow.
So now that is over 7 times, right? So this is like
the percentage of your budget that goes toward it is crazy.
Yeah. So, for the older people who are like, well, we just had to work hard and saved and bought a home. Like, yeah, you did, but it was also easier because the percentage of your income was a much smaller, or a multiple of your income. So it is harder for young folks.
I think a question that comes up though is that fair, or how is that fair, or right? Because like you just said, it's older people. It was just easier, or they worked hard, obviously, but it was more attainable, and now it's not, or it's, in your case with this chart, it's like twice as difficult to buy, or more than twice as difficult to buy, or 7 times as right for a young person. So, and it might even feel even more difficult, but is that fair, or how do we look at that as Christians? Like, what, those are the sorts of questions that I think come out because people feel like slighted by the system, right? Hey, I'm a young person. I work just as hard as, but why can't I do this? And so what we want to try and figure out, and I think what we want to look at is, okay, it might not be fair, but why is this happening? And what's going on under the surface there, right?
Like what caused the brokenness?
What caused that? And is it going to change? Or is it going to continue?
Well,
right?
So,
and what can change it, right? Because those are the factors that, like, if they're outside of our control, right? You might say, I want to buy a house, but if the house is costing you 7 times your income,
right,
then you better make 7 times the income to buy a house. Or wait and hope that it comes down, right? But you need to know whether or not it is going to come down or not, right?
And so you mentioned that stat, and it was the early 80s, right? Like, so whatever that is, like a 45 year period, something like that. So is it like immediately in my mind, I think like, okay, like governments have overspent. Like they overspent before that, but like we've really seen like a push in monetary theory over that timeline where they're like, no, debt is good. It pushes growth. Like a lot of the economy runs off of that debt.
Yeah.
Is so did we just like completely like break the money supply over time? And not to completely go down that rabbit hole, but like I think it is valid, and
I
like
think
it is part of the reason.
Yeah, a good rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did that all start, Mark?
Gold standard,
Well,
something like that.
No, and it's, I mean, we've often talked about this, and we kind of pinpoint 1971 and the going off the gold standard, but it actually goes back further than that. And if you really want to have a villain, it would be central banks. Central banking is where sort of fractional reserve banking started, right?
Yep.
So that's the idea that banks can lend out more money than they actually have.
Mm-hmm.
So banks have a unique license from the government to print money.
Yep.
Right? The government can print money.
Like most mortgages you go and get, they're just printing that money.
Yeah.
Typically.
Yeah. A mortgage is essentially new money into the economy.
Yep.
That did not exist before. And that was hard for me to wrap my head around when I first heard that, but it's absolutely true, right?
Yeah.
Banks just can create that money because the government allows them to do that.
And when there's low rates, they create more of it because more people are asking for it.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, yeah, where do we go? So central banking, I guess, because once you sort of centralize, and it started with gold deposits, when you centralize them, banks realize that not everybody wants their gold out at once.
Yeah.
And we're talking like 1800s, early 1900s, right? So we can actually lend out this paper money, because not everybody's going to come back and get their gold at the same time. So we can actually lend out more money than we have, and we can make money on that by collecting interest on that money, and presumably, as long as the rate of default isn't too high, we're good. Yeah, and everything should be fine, right? Yep. But then I'll borrow from Bank A, I may deposit that in Bank B, and now I can deposit non-tangible assets, so I don't have to deposit gold. I can deposit these credits. Yes. So that bank will do the same thing. Yes. And they will lend out again and again and again. So you can start off with $100 and end up with, I can't remember what it is, but $900 of money in the economy.
Yeah, quickly becomes exponential.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the system that we have. Right. And I read a book recently called The Bible and Bitcoin. We don't have to get into Bitcoin, but most Bitcoiners start off with talking about like looking at our monetary system. Mm-hmm. And so he talks a lot about false weights and measures and how our money system is corrupt because of false weights and measures. Yep. And I mean, he's at some level, he's absolutely correct. This is Alan Armstrong is the fellow's name. He's a pastor out of Windsor.
Because the banks can just tip the scale in their favor, right?
The banks and the government. Yeah. And there's no accountability. Yeah. Right?
Well,
previously.
It's legal for them to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's not legal for me to do it unless I get a mortgage.
Yeah.
And so just maybe to tie back into young folks, like you would ask, okay, since a house is so unattainable, should they even bother? And I would say yes, because that's one of the ways that you can sort of put your finger on the scales. Doesn't mean that it's right or just. I don't think it's unethical either, because this is a system that we work in. I think even Jesus kind of acknowledged that, like, work with the system that you have. He never said overthrow the current monetary system, because even the Roman system was corrupt. They ended up debasing their money and ended up, I mean, depending on how you look at it, this is part of the downfall of the Roman Empire, was when they started debasing their money. And they did that physically, right? We do it just by printing money and spending money we don't have.
Clip the coins, right?
Yeah. They make the coins smaller. They would reduce the content of gold in there till eventually there was no gold or silver in their coins. Yeah. And led to all kinds of problems. But basic story is, if you have a hard asset, if you have the actual gold, or if you have real estate in this case, you're going to retain that value.
Why not just, I mean, the obvious answer might be you should have a diverse portfolio and whatever, but like, why not just rent and then just put your money in the stock market or some other place, like have your own business, and you can make your money in your business because you know your business better, and it's ideally less affected by outside sources than something like real estate would be.
Yeah. So, I mean, The one alternative to real estate, I would say, one of the alternatives would be starting your own business. But that's not for everybody. But that is a good way to be stewardly, to multiply your wealth.
That's a great way, right? Because,
Yeah.
but it also, like, the drawbacks of that is you got to put your time and energy into that. And
You guys put a lot of time and energy into real estate, though.
But that's also our business, right?
Yeah.
So we, like, the assets that, like a real estate asset that you own represents, like, a good long-term store of wealth. It might not be as, it might not grow as quickly as a business would. Right. But it's going to grow, with inflation. It's going to, pay itself down. And there's a lot of benefits to owning it, but with business, I think business is probably a better investment, if you're successful, right? But not everybody has the time and energy to dedicate every hour of the day to running a business.
We're talking more passive. Right?
Yeah. And so if you're looking for an accessible investment opportunity that a lot of people can access and benefit from, regardless of their skill sets or whatever, real estate is a good vehicle.
Yeah.
You talk about diversifying, right? That's sort of a popular thing.
Sure.
If you just look at it strictly by the numbers, wealthy people generally do not get wealthy by diversifying. And not that being wealthy is the be all or the end all, but if we're talking about sort of safeguarding your money in this environment, you kind of work towards being wealthy.
Yeah, if you want
so
to
that you can bless others,
you
right?
want to grow it. That's
like if you have the option, then you should do that.
Like that's how I would define the stewardship, right? Like you don't want your money to decrease. Tyler wants to jump in here though.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a great conversation. I get to just be like a radio call-in, so this is it's great. I'm just curious, like, can we go back to a little bit to the steward? So I'm just trying to understand, like, people, I think, like, their parents have owned homes, and young people, like, I think it's in a lot of us to be like us. I guess I'm making myself younger than I am, but like, young people coming up want to own a house. I think that's kind of in us all a little bit. And I think a lot of people see the stewardship in it, that it's like something that's going to grow over time. The old adage that's like your home is your biggest asset. I mean, you probably would have some comments on that. It's probably not, Robert Kiyosaki probably wouldn't like that statement, but like compared to a society where everyone rents, like why should young people care about owning a home when, like, in Europe, say, the majority of people rent in probably like New York City, and perhaps steward their wealth in other ways? Like, what's so important about real estate, or why is it something that, like, should be like aspired to in the way that, like, we think about stewardship, and like and not let our society just become that rental society?
Yeah. So I mean, and that's an excellent point, and that's, people will talk about this as well. Like, why buy, just rent? And I've heard this argument before, right? Instead of buying a home, because you got to pay to upkeep the home and all that stuff, so it's not simply the cost of your mortgage and insurance or property taxes, but there's upkeep as well, right? So I could just rent, and then with the difference in my income, I'll put that into the stock market. So I guess number one, real estate beats the stock market every time. And people can always give you examples, but I've done the math, and my wife and I wrote a book about real estate, Airbnb, and I have an example in there where the growth of the S&P, Standard & Poor 500 index over time is about 10%. And real estate maybe it has been a little bit less in terms of equity. But so a couple points on that, and then I'll get a little bit back to the point about young people buying houses. But number one, nobody ever really invests in the S&P 500 as a whole and gets that 10% return. Like, it's very, so this is the example that people use. That's not accurate. People will buy like an indexed fund or something like that, which generally will not perform as well because there's management fees. Or people who play in the stock market, most people lose. Most people do not do well stock picking, right? There are professionals who do that. So if you get them to do it for you, you're going to pay a management fee. But just looking at the numbers, real estate outperforms the stock market every time, and by a pretty good margin as well, because it's not just equity growth we're talking about cash flow. So presumably you have some cash flow, maybe not right now, but over time you have been. Plus you have somebody else paying down that asset. Plus there's leverage where you can take, 50 grand and buy an asset that's worth 250 grand, let's say. Whereas with stocks, you're taking that 50 grand and you're going to invest it. You can leverage in the stock market, but that's many times riskier. And you could just wipe out your whole investment like that if you leverage poorly. So it's much riskier, not as good stock market. And that kind of gets back to your sort of diversified portfolio comment as well, right? So I'm not big on stocks. Don't ever have stocks, but if you have a choice, and like I said, most wealthy people pinpoint a certain area, and that's often usually a business, but that's where all their money, all their time, all their effort is in one spot. And then when they get wealthier, then they diversify to safeguard, to hold on to that. So, should young people get into real estate? We say yes. How do you do that is another story, but there are ways to do that. And we can talk about that as well.
Well, Tyler's asking also, like, is it the right thing to do? Or I think largely that's cultural too, right?
Yeah.
If everybody else is renting and you're content to rent, like, it's not like morally superior to be a homeowner necessarily, right? Unless,
No.
Are you morally?
I mean, I'm a little bit, but that's.
But there's something to be said for like being in a place. It's more permanent, right? Built community.
But it's also something that in Canada here we're used to, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of culturally normal,
Yeah.
but that's starting to change, right? And that change, maybe we're just resistant to it, but why can't I do the same thing my parents did, or the next generation, right? And then you just point to a place like Holland or in Europe where there's more density, the house prices are higher because the values are higher, and nobody really owns. There are a lot of them are renters, right? Yeah. And we're kind of going in that direction, right?
We absolutely are.
Yeah.
People are a lot more transient nowadays too, though. They don't stick around. Like, they don't just grow up in the same place and stay there. So I feel like that's a factor in that too.
Yeah,
like
there's more of
a demand side for rent.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, but people would, buy here, move, and then buy there, right?
Sure.
As well. But no, you're like, to your point about Europe and Ty's point as well. Like, we're moving in that direction. So that's another reason I think if you can get into real estate, do that. And people will say there's a crash coming, or, you got to wait till prices are right. Like, you can never time the real estate market because you simply don't know. And the more you get into macroeconomics, the more you realize, like, nobody really knows what's going to happen. We can make some decisions based on past cycles and what's happened, but you don't really know. So when you're able to, get in and buy, because it is a long-term investment. And then knowing that, well, in our opinion, knowing that we're moving towards a European model, like, why are there more renters? Because nobody can afford to buy a home, because the income to price of the home multiple is that much higher. And we're headed there. I firmly believe we're headed there, so that in 50 years, it's going to be different. Young people will not be able to buy a home. You'll have generational mortgages where the parents buy a home. They will never pay that off. Maybe their kids or their grandkids will, but that asset will be handed down through the family.
Do we see that in other places?
In Europe, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can get a 100-year mortgage, right?
That's
in France
crazy.
or other places in Europe. Well, because it's just understood.
Mark just
Nobody
paid off his first 100-year mortgage.
Nice.
That's ageist, Brent.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Ageist. So, I mean, I guess a quick answer is, I think real estate is a great investment for young people. And if they can get in, they should, because that's going to be probably the best performer for them. Your personal home as an asset, Robert Kiyosaki would say no, because it doesn't make you any money. But when we're looking at young people buying real estate, most often young folks are now buying a place that's either a duplex already or has the potential to be a duplex with maybe an accessory dwelling unit, so that they can rent that out to afford the mortgage. And that's part of their qualifying through the bank as well. Is like, this place has an apartment in it, and that is going to help us pay, here's what it could rent for. That's going to help us pay this mortgage.
Yeah.
That's just part of the qualifying process. And I think that's just going to be a normal thing from now on.
So why did houses inflate quicker than other things? Like, we can still, I mean, it's pretty brutal, but most people can still afford to buy food and other like essentials like that. But it seems like housing has increased that much more. Is it because the money generally flows into harder assets like real estate?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, but the closer you are to the money printer, the better the effect. And so we talked about mortgages, how mortgages are essentially a form of printing money, right? This is the only way that regular people can create money, right? As there's really no other way other than having your own business. You can create money that way. But other than that, it's houses. There are other assets available to the wealthy, right? Yeah. Hard assets are perform much better.
You mean like paintings? And
well,
stuff like
okay,
that?
housing is a need, right? Everyone needs to live somewhere, but despite what you might think, not everybody needs to eat steak, right? Or
I might disagree with that.
Yeah. Ought they to eat steak?
They ought to.
But what I'm getting at is the fact that everyone has to make their own personal decisions and choices, right? So if you have, the way they measure inflation is this basket of goods that you kind of mentioned, but consumers have choices to make every day. You go to the store and you want to get groceries. Well, you can pick the nicest, most expensive cut of meat, or you can pick up a package of hot dogs, right? So those things inflate, like the really valuable, scarce, hard to produce, quality items, they'll inflate more than like the easy to produce, kind of watered down. And housing is an example, like a prime example of something that's very expensive to produce. It's like highly scarce, right? Because for one, it's sitting on land that is scarce, and they're not making more. And that land is governed by zoning policies that kind of restrict development or limit development, right? And it takes a lot of capital to do these things. So housing is a huge, scarce asset. So that's why I think people, they obviously need housing. So housing goes up in value.
That makes sense.
But they sacrifice a lot of other things, right? They might sacrifice, they're not going on as many vacations, or they're not buying a new car, or they're not eating steak. Yep. You look like you've been eating steak.
Yeah, well, no, I wish.
Maybe you're sacrificing somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, there's other intangible qualities as well, right? When we talk about raising a family, for example, right? I can go, if I just got married, I could go live with my wife in a 1-bedroom apartment. We start having children, assuming that's the path we're going down, and that's a good path, then it's going to be hard. Like, okay, I can get to a 2-bedroom apartment, maybe a 3-bedroom, right? And in our society, we're not used to having, we have 4 children at home, and most people are like, whoa, that's, wow, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So 2 kids is maybe the norm. So you could get away with living in an apartment. But really, if you've got a bigger family, a house is going to be where you want to go. So at that point, do you want to own, or do you want to rent?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to start building up some, I don't want to say wealth, but your money to actually stay with you in the form of that house, as opposed to going to someone else paying rent.
Right.
And that's another point about rent. Like, most landlords are going to charge more rent than it costs them for their mortgage.
Yep.
So as far as rent being cheaper, like, I don't think so, because why else would a landlord rent you his place? Nobody's going to rent it at a loss, because they also have to keep some money aside to fix the roof and to do, make repairs and stuff. So generally that's not going to be more affordable. So, but just quality of life, raising a family, generally a house is going to be a better option for most people.
Right. Okay. But then if you're here in Canada and you're looking to get into market, and you do your research and you find a way to get in, I can see why some people might still have concerns with like a quote unquote crash or something like that, because the US is like, on the same monetary system as us, yet housing is more affordable there. Not crazy affordable, but more affordable. And you do see people moving down there for reasons like that. So, like, how are we to know that this isn't like some sort of bubble in Canada? Like, why are we so inflated? It feels like here. Like, is it like a demand thing? Is it a supply thing? Regulation? Like, what's going on there exactly?
Brent, it's
all of the above.
all of the above. I mean, one thing we can look at is immigration, for example, right? We have the same levels of immigration, probably even higher than the United States. Like just pure numbers, right?
Yeah.
Let's say 1 million people a year is about the number, but the U.S. has 8 times the population.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that going to do to our, if you just talk about supply and demand, what is that going to do to our supply?
Yeah.
And it's been that way it hasn't been that crazy. The numbers have been that high for a while. Since COVID, they've really crept up, but we've always been per capita much higher than the United States, for example, on immigration, right? We've had supply issues for quite a while in Southern Ontario anyways, right? And that's why people are moving out of Southern Ontario. But, there's one reason why I don't think we could see a correction. We've seen that since COVID because that wasn't sustainable, right? And there's still some room for prices to go down. But in the end, I don't see.
Just quickly on immigration, like the government controls immigration.
Yeah.
And why would they decrease immigration? If you think about that, right? Like they want to have more economic growth in the country. They want to have more activity. They want, they want growth, right? They want to be able to charge taxes. They want people to have jobs and buy homes. So they need people. And if we're not having babies, then they need to sustain that growth from somewhere, and that comes from immigration in a large way. So if they reduce the immigration, that can have a negative impact on maybe their economic targets, right?
Yeah. I mean, the only counter to that would be if we have the situation which we have now, which is like nobody can afford because of, in large part, immigration.
Well, so that's one of the
unrest that way. Then
that's one of the arguments that there is a housing bubble and it has to pop.
Yeah. What if they just
because it's not affordable?
Yeah.
So my counter to that is, well, go to Europe. We're waiting for it to pop, right? This has been hundreds of years.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened. It's not affordable. It's not getting any more affordable, and prices haven't dropped. So simply because the prices are high doesn't mean that they have to fall. You know what I mean? It's all the factors that led prices to get where they are still there. And the biggest reason is the devaluing of our money supply, or of our money, of the monetary unit.
But wouldn't the U.S. be under the same pressure that way?
They are. And I mean, so it's not been as pronounced because Canada is more dependent on real estate as part of the economy, right?
Yeah,
Up to 40% of our GDP is real estate related.
That makes sense. Yeah. Compared to the U.S., more business.
Yeah. The U.S. is more diverse, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, with our immigration and existing supply constraints, it's not nearly as bad as the United States. Okay. But in the States, the price of houses through COVID has doubled.
Yeah.
So, tell that to somebody who lives in the States. They're not going to feel any pity for us here in Canada because it has gotten more unaffordable in the States as well.
And even within Canada too, right? There's areas of, it's not like Canada as a whole is way more expensive, right? There's pockets, because the real estate markets are local, right? There's local factors. There's reasons why you would want to live in Toronto and why a lot of people come there and a lot of people want to get a job and whatever, right? And there's reasons why other people want to move to Calgary.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Because it's more affordable.
And you can look at New York, San Francisco, like the major urban centers. Like it's pricier than here, or it's at least comparable to Toronto. So again,
we're not completely
markets.
out to lunch that way. Yeah.
No, not at all.
No.
Well, and another thing to think about is the building construction too. Like how many units are we creating? Do they have to dig below the frost line? So what's their cost for construction in the States and different areas, right?
Yeah, that's
and
fair.
Look at development fees.
Yeah.
Toronto is insane.
Yeah.
Like what is it? I think it's over $100,000 to develop a unit in Toronto. Like that's just fees that go to the city of Toronto.
Oh wow.
Development charges, right?
Yeah. So you have things like all these sticky factors, right? Like immigration's not going to drop off substantially anytime soon. And like the regulation is not going to decrease. Even if like, you get a Pierre Polyev in there, it's going to be less, but like, it's not going to be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, the main factor is the devaluing of our money, right?
Yep.
Supply and demand, all these other things aside, unless our money suddenly increases in value or we go into a deflationary environment,
Yeah.
then we'll see asset prices decrease.
Yeah.
But I don't see that happening, right? If you look at spending, debt, the only way that we can afford stuff here is to get more debt in Canada.
But now we get into the ethical like problem with this, because
Yeah.
so we have everybody's like, okay, real estate's a good idea, especially like wealthy people like to invest in real estate because it has good returns, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
But now, as we've seen probably, I don't know, over the last 10 years or something like that, you see more and more people set up corporations and like go big into real estate. Like, you guys are very aware of this. And in particular, like even single detached homes, turning them into like duplex, triplex, adding ADUs.
Yep.
So, and I know you guys are active in this space, but like I guess how do you defend that? Because like some people would say like, okay, like this is corporations, they're taking homes from families who are trying to get in the market. And like, as Christians, like, yeah, maybe it gets a good return, but like, can we ethically do this? And it kind of seems like the way we're describing this whole situation is like, there's X amount of cookies in the cookie jar and everyone's going to get their cookies. And then eventually in like 2040, there's going to be no cookies left. And then everyone else has to rent or do a long mortgage from their parent over like 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess like it's sort of the chicken and the egg, right?
Sure.
So as individual real estate investors and not like a BlackRock who might be buying thousands of...
I'm not saying you are. I'm just, yeah.
No, but there is an argument to be made around the commoditization of housing and what that does.
Yep.
So I guess a couple points. Number one, private landlords provide pretty well all of the rental units in Canada. And if we're just talking about Canada, right? Probably 90%, right? So when we talk about, people having a place to live, that comes from one of these parasitical investors, one of these terrible landlords buying another house and then renting it out. So, where would people live? Well, the only reason people can rent, and not everybody wants to buy, is because people actually are investing. That's the basis of our rental stock in Canada is investors. So do we want to vilify investors and, especially small investors for doing that? I don't think so. And does that mean that they're wrong for doing that? Again, I don't think so. Brent is, in a small way, buying properties, investing in them, densifying them, creating more housing where there was not housing before. So it might have been a single family unit. They're now making 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 places for people to live. And they're not as big.
No.
But, how do you how do you value that ethically?
Where,
right? It's a spot for someone to live.
Yeah. Where do houses come from? Right? Like, they don't, the government will say in a big announcement, X number of $1 million is going to create all these new homes. Right? Like, they don't have this big button they push and they just insert money like a debit machine and whatever and push the button and out come all these dwelling units, right?
Yeah.
So somehow the housing needs to be produced or created. And like we talked about before, that has limitations, right? You need smart people and skilled laborers and designers and engineers, and you need to meet all this red tape and get a permit and get a piece of land and then get all the materials in from, concrete to wood to whatever it is, right? And then assemble it. And it takes a long time. So, where do they come from if it's not somebody paying?
Somebody's taking a risk.
Somebody's
to get
taking
a
a risk to actually produce this thing.
But the counterpoint to that is that risk was being taken 40, 50, 60 years ago.
Families.
Right.
Yeah.
So like now.
So what has changed in that time period?
Yeah, well, now we're back to the money system again.
Absolutely.
Because it makes too much sense. Yeah.
Right? The investors have always been active.
Well, let's break this down for a second because...
Break it down,
So,
Brent.
yeah, let's break it down. So money.
Don't rap, okay?
I'm not going to rap.
Go ahead. I completely threw you off. The money system.
Okay, yeah. So I always ask these kind of first principle questions. What is money to begin with, right? So what people are trying to do with money is to save their time and energy, right? in some medium or some technology or something for the future, because the way it works is you go out and you do your job, and you might not be able to spend all the fruits of your labor, or you might not want to spend all the fruits of your labor when you come home. So you need a medium to save it in, right? And to store it for the future. And so that medium or that technology we call money, right? And we can go into a ton of different things with this, because there's hundreds of hours of content out there talking about what is money exactly. But money has certain properties or characteristics to it that lend itself to being saved as a store of value. It's a medium of exchange between people, right? So it has to be divisible, it has to be fungible, all of these things. And what's happened with housing is that over the last 50 years, we probably go back even further, is it's starting to get monetized. And what I mean by monetized is it's people are treating housing as if it's money, in a sense, right? Yeah. And there's other things that are being monetized, or whatever, I guess you could say commoditized, right?
Sneakers.
Yeah. Art. Yeah, you got nice sneakers, man. But they're looking at the housing as not a place to live, not a place to raise a family, but it's a place to store my wealth for the future, right? And the more that the money, like the Canadian dollar, the US dollar, the currency that we use, for lack of a better word, sucks, or depreciates in value, debases, people will just naturally say, look, why would I save something that someone else can print or produce easily at a whim, right? With just a flick of a switch. Yep. Why would you save that? So,
and on the flip side, you should take on debt because it gets smaller as you go.
Yeah. Well, is it stewardly to save, to do what you're saying?
Just to finish the point, so people just naturally, maybe it's even subconscious, they choose to not save the dollars, and they're instead putting it in the house. Yep. So now, whether they like it or not, the government has essentially created a system where the houses are being used not as houses, but as money, or to some degree, right? Like maybe it was 5% 100 years ago. Now it's 50%, right? Mm-hmm. I need to live somewhere, but I also need to save my money. So I can do both with the house. Yeah. Right. And then that problem is one that we're looking at, and we're saying, is that trend going to continue, or is the money all of a sudden going to improve, and people are going to say, you know what? House is just like, it's the same shingles, the same drywall. They just deteriorate over time. Why would I store my money in house? Because it just gets less valuable over time, right? And they'll go put their money in something else. Yeah. Right. So that's I think what's really underlying this whole problem of houses becoming too unaffordable. But anyways, you guys both had.
No, go ahead, man.
No, you're right. But like, so then you have to ask, like, is it stewardly just to save your money in the bank then? Probably not, if you know that it's going to be debased, right? And there's an interesting correlation. If you look at the M2 money supply, so that's the broad money supply in Canada, versus Toronto house prices, it is like the identical graph over the last 50 years or whatever. Yeah.
Makes sense.
So, that tells me, among many other things, that what is causing the price, not even the value, but the price of homes to go up? Is it because greedy investors are buying them all up? Like, that wasn't the case for a long time. And it's, again, become more commoditized now. But my argument is that is not a result of investors doing it. The investors have identified this trend of money printing, of currency debasement, which is causing assets to rise in value, right? Just like a Rolex or fine art, or people buy wine, whiskey. That whiskey doesn't, okay, that's a bad, wine gets better with age, but like a Rolex doesn't, a Picasso doesn't, but why is it going up in value? There's more money available because money is being debased.
People have more trust in the long-term sustainability of those assets as compared to
opposed to currency units. Yeah. So that is what's happening. Houses are not increasing in value. They're increasing in price in currency units. And all investors are doing is saying, this is the best spot for me to put my money. And we're going to provide housing for people anyways. But this is the best spot for me to put this as a regular investor. I can't afford a Picasso. I might not even be able to afford a really nice bottle of whiskey, but I can buy a house, and I can do that.
You say that you can't afford it. You also probably can't afford a house, but you can get a loan, right?
Well, I can't. I can't get a loan for. Actually, you can. But generally speaking, you can't get a loan to invest in whiskey.
Bottle of whiskey.
Yeah, that's what I meant, right? You can't get a loan to invest in every kind of scarce asset, but with housing, it's pretty easy. I mean, relatively to the other
compared to other things,
and that's the difference maker
for people to lend money on.
It's deemed as to be safer, and we've created this whole industry around it.
But then biblically, we know, like in Proverbs, says like the borrower is a slave to the lender. So then you think, okay, do I want to take on a giant mortgage and risk my family's future just to make sure my money means something down the road?
Yeah,
which is that sucks. That's not a good situation.
Yep.
But on the flip side, if you keep the money, like say you rent for real cheap, you live frugally, and you just stock away your money, you're kind of a slave to the people who issue the money, which is the banks of the government.
Yeah. So the system has been flipped from when we're looking at Proverbs, and because I've heard these verses used in this context, right? You shouldn't be a slave to, and you're right, you should not be enslaved to mammon, correct? But in our system, debt for assets is actually a liability, is an asset.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Right? It's not a liability. So if you go buy a jet ski, that's a liability. That doesn't produce any income. And that's not, I mean, you could argue it's good for your quality of life or whatever, but buying liabilities, and especially borrow, like if you have the money to buy a jet ski, go ahead and buy one. If you're going to borrow to buy one, that's a bad decision.
Yep.
Right. And then typically you're going to, and we see that people, we have a consumeristic society, and we don't buy a vehicle, right? You borrow for it, and you borrow for this and that, and you become a slave to credit card companies. But when we're talking about assets, that's flipped on its head. Debt is now actually good. And in our crazy system, you want to take on as much good debt as possible. The more debt, like Robert Kiyosaki, famous, and I keep going back to him, but famously he said, like, I owe $1 billion. I'm $1 billion in debt, but he's got billions of dollars in assets in real estate. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at buying real estate, for example, is that something where you're going to be enslaved to the borrower? No, because the borrower maintains an asset. They actually own it, right? The bank owns that house and has full rights to it until you're fully paid off. So if you owe $1 on it, the bank still can take that money. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be something where where the lender will lose money. The bank will never lose money on a house, almost never, except in maybe some recent times. So it's identifying like what's a good relationship and what's not. So buying.
Can you explain the debt part of the assets again though? Like, why is that good?
Like,
because in my mind, I'm like, okay, like you get your house, right? Like if you were a more conservative person, you'd be like, I'm going to work my butt off to pay this off. Yep. I don't owe anybody, and this thing will appreciate. And then if I make money off it appreciating, maybe I'll go invest it after that. But like in the meantime, I got to raise my family, pay for schools, churches, all this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So for your primary house, you could make that argument because your primary house is actually a liability. It's a lifestyle asset.
Yep.
Somewhere for you to raise your kids, but it's not doing anything for your bottom line, right? It's not producing income unless you're renting out part of it. Then it's partially an asset. But if I buy an investment property, that's now an asset.
Yep.
So I can, I'll put down 20% of the value.
Yeah,
I get 100% of the growth, 100% of the cash flow, 100% of all of the benefits accrue to me if I do it properly, because you can still make a bad real estate investment decision. So in this case, for me to owe $700,000 on a house when I've put down $100,000, and it's actually producing money, it's putting money into my pocket every month, and then I can write off the interest payments on that, the expenses that I have. That is a net positive for me and for my family. And the downside is like right now, maybe. Well, typically there's been little downside. The downside is if interest rates go up and I can't afford it anymore.
Just a quick,
but sorry, one more thing.
Fight.
When we're talking about borrowing and lending, right? The Bible speaks very poorly, not of lending, because that was common in Israel, right? And it was encouraged lend freely, right? But it speaks very poorly of the borrower who borrows with no intent to pay back. And that's really, I think, the defining difference. So someone who borrows either with the intent not to pay back or the without the ability to pay back.
Kiyosaki doesn't want to pay it back, though.
No, but he could, right? Because those houses all have equity in them.
Yeah,
so if he had to
and the reason
end the relationship with the bank, he could do that on good terms. He would sell the house, pay them off.
But the reason he doesn't want to pay it back is because the financial incentives are not there for him to do that, right? Like, he is better off if he doesn't, right?
Because his money is all sunk into that asset, and
so
then
just to
well,
give
he's borrowing at X%, and he's making a higher percentage.
And the spread is better, yeah. So just to kind of illustrate, because people might be aware of their money losing value. So if you have $1 million in cash in the bank right now, what is that $1 million going to be worth in 30 years?
Peanuts.
Like, it will still be $1 million, but it will be able to purchase a lot fewer goods and services. Like, the purchasing power has been eroded massively, right? And the rate at which that purchasing power is eroding is kind of quickening every year too. And that's kind of by design in the system, but that's a different conversation. But now let's flip it on its head. So let's say I gave you $1 million loan on an asset. Let's say you own a piece of real estate and you had $1 million mortgage at the bank right now.
Mm-hmm.
What is that $1 million mortgage going to be worth in 30 years if you never pay it off? Let's say you just still have $1 million loan at the bank in 30 years.
Let's say, for a fun example, let's say you were making $1 million a year in today.
Yeah.
And then if, like, fast forward 30 years, assuming your income keeps up with inflation to a decent degree, that loan of $1 million is like not that much money anymore.
Yeah. So relatively speaking, like, the price of goods and services has gone up, wages have gone up, asset prices have gone up in a huge way.
Mm-hmm.
So now the debt of $1 million when you bought the asset has benefited from inflation for 30 years, and the asset has gone up. Even though the house has deteriorated over time, it's still worth more in the nominal price, right, than the loan, even though you never paid the loan off.
Yep.
So that's kind of an illustration of how to use inflation to your advantage. And I think there's an American guy, his name's Jason Hartman, real estate guy in the States, and he kind of coined the term inflation-deduced debt destruction. So you're getting debt, and you're letting inflation take its toll on that debt. And that's essentially the exact same principle that the government employs on their debt, right? And that's why Mark and I, we talk about this, but that's why we've identified, we want to do the same thing the government is, because they're in control, right? If their debt is growing, but they're using inflation to make it look smaller and smaller by printing more money, we want to do the same thing they're doing. And that's what we're doing through real estate, right? You're buying that asset, and then you're letting the debt look smaller over time.
Yeah, it just sucks.
That's one.
It screws people who don't have assets. That's a problem.
Well, that is the problem. That's why we say if you don't have assets, get assets.
Yeah.
Right? If you're a young person, get some of those assets. So an illustration. Oh, sorry, Ty.
Go ahead, Ty.
Oh, no. I just wanted to kind of ask more specifically about real estate. And I know, like, people can go, we'll refer everyone to the Two Steward show, and people can go over there and hear more in-depth conversations between you guys about strategies and things like that you guys talk about. But I'm kind of curious about real estate. Kind of a strategic question. We talked about a little bit about the stock market, and we talked about leverage, although I'm surprised how that word hasn't come up as much as I thought it would. But like leveraging your money using debt in real estate. But there's also other things like the tax. You mentioned the tax code is written that favors real estate. I'm aware of like some estate planning things, like the end of your life real estate really benefits that from that kind of code. Like, there are things that the government has done to incentivize real estate investing, as opposed to leveraging your money in like what Mark was talking about, like in a dangerous way in the stock market. Like your bottom side is a lot lower. So I'm kind of curious, like, can you guys just touch on that a little bit? Like, why is real estate like strategically from some of those things that the government and like not specifically how our money is, but some of the other incentives that real estate kind of provides, as opposed to someone saying renting and using the rest of their income for these other investments.
Yeah, I mean, the government has traditionally encouraged home ownership, right? They really want people to own their own homes because they understand too that if, and I mean, this is going back quite a ways, but, and you can go back to maybe Second World War. What's that?
When you were a small child? Oh.
Back in the 1800s,
the founding of this
just
country.
a lad.
Yes. Yeah. Sat on Sir John A's knee at Christmas.
See, I never know any of these things.
That's true. Yeah. What happened last century, Mark?
Yeah.
No, but the government has traditionally encouraged home ownership, because they understand that we could talk about the family as a nuclear unit, and if you have if you have people who can afford homes, hopefully that leads towards stable nuclear families, which is something I think we can all agree on is like a good, and that used to be a building block of society, right? And especially you talk about the GIs coming home from the war. And actually, you can go back a little bit further into the 30s. So you talk about some of the tax advantages to real estate. They're more pronounced in the United States, and there's a few different laws. Like a 1031 exchange is one. Just very quickly, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but this is where basically you can sell an investment property and not pay capital gains as long as you're buying another one. And they actually introduced that to help farm owners get bigger and bigger farms and to improve their sort of situation coming out of the 30s with the Depression, with drought, and where farms were devastated. They really wanted to encourage farming. And so that kind of moved its way into investment properties as well. But yeah, looking at modern lending rules and stuff, it's all designed to encourage home ownership, and also I think to encourage investment in real estate. Because again, the government does not provide housing to people. Investors provide housing to other people. So they want to encourage that. I don't know if I got a little bit off track there, Ty, but I don't know if that answers your question fully. Oh,
yeah,
leverage.
I'm just thinking.
Yeah,
people might say like, well, I might be good at the stock market, and say like, I mean, not to dwell too much on that, but like there are other reasons why real estate, other than just the appreciation, or even if I'm just thinking about like young people and even their primary residence, the government has even doesn't tax capital gains on a primary residence yet, which could be a big problem.
That's
sell your house.
Little things like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's all designed towards the government supporting home ownership. And we've identified 7 reasons why real estate is like a superior investment vehicle for anyone. We don't have to get into all of them, but leverage is one of the big ones, and that like instantly just leverage makes it so much better than it, and it's government encouraged leverage.
Yeah.
Right, where they will, and they'll even insure your first home purchase, or they'll insure other home purchases as well. The government actually encourages it. So, there's a saying in the U.S., "Don't fight the Fed." So that's the Federal Reserve Bank, right? And that just means like, don't try to go against current government policy and the flow of how they're doing things, because it's just foolish. The government is much bigger than you, and they're going to win. So Brent talked about using that sort of theory to your advantage, right? Using inflation, it will reduce your pile of money, your pile of savings, but it will reduce your debt as well over the long term.
Yeah, if you align yourself with them and follow their incentives.
Yeah.
Right. And one of them, not to jump back to Kiyosaki, but we did a little series on his book, right? So we kind of have it fresh in our heads, but real estate is one thing that's rewarded in the tax structure by the government, but also business. So if you're an employer and you have a corporation, you can benefit from corporate tax laws, because you're basically being incentivized to provide jobs, right? So the government wants jobs, and they want housing, right? And those two things that are beneficial for everybody, that the government wants to incentivize, but they can't necessarily just produce themselves or create. So the way that the tools that they have, the government has at their disposal, is to incentivize this through tax benefits, right? It's like you owe this amount of tax, but if you have a house or a rental property, you can write off the expenses against the income, and you can depreciate the property. And we can get into the weeds about the tax stuff, which I know very little about because I'm not an accountant. But same thing with business, right? If you employ people, right, versus being a self-employed business owner where you bring home a big income, you're going to have a hefty tax bill, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way the government incentivizes the behaviors that they want.
Is it fair to, and like, I mean, I think it is, but the question should be asked, like, is it fair to do what you can to shelter your money from taxes? Because like the way the system is set up, like you guys have just explained, if you invest in real estate or you start a business, you have these advantages because you are providing, a shelter or jobs or whatever. So like, have you guys gotten into that on your show at all? Like, have you talked about that? I feel like the general consensus among people, like Christians, I mean, is just like, yes, like give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but like I don't want to give Caesar anything more than I have to. Like this is Caesar takes enough.
Well, I mean, the government is directing us. Like, yeah, we have to rightfully pay taxes, and the government tells us what that is. So just follow those rules.
Sure.
And people will call it like loopholes or sheltering. Like you're using the tax code as it exists.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get what the problem is. You're not. Yeah, you talked about income earners versus business owners or real estate investors. So an income earner really doesn't have much recourse. You make income, you pay income tax. So then they'll look at someone who's got a business or an investment property that isn't paying the same amount of tax, and they say, well, you're sheltering or you're doing something dodgy.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're doing what the government allows and actually encourages.
Yeah, and the flip side of that, the important side, is the value those people create, right? Like if you're just a wage earner, that's good. You do a service for the company you work for, and you get paid commensurate to that. But you go home, you're not also, if you're doing something else, you're going to be getting paid for it outside of work hours.
It's a relatively low risk thing, right? Because with a business owner, you're going to take capital, you're going to make expenses, you're going to have a lot more invested, a lot more risk.
Yeah. But yeah, as a business owner, you spend and then you pay taxes. As a wage earner, you pay taxes and then you can spend, right? Whatever's left, then you can spend on what you need to live. So there's a big difference right there. When you think about being stewardly, right? So maybe you're not going to be a business owner, but you can apply some of the same rules with real estate. You will spend and then you will pay taxes, as opposed to paying taxes first and then spending.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we got this far on the show. Go ahead, though.
Just one more.
The eyes are starting to glaze a little.
No.
One more maybe interesting to mention that to this thing, right, is once you pay tax dollars to the government, is they spend them, and they don't necessarily always spend them the way you would, right?
Really?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Or wisely or stewardly at all, right?
Yeah.
And I think we delved into this a little bit on our show, so you have to tune into that episode. But we talk about welfare and some of the social consequences of all of this stuff, because if you're like, as Christians, we're called to be hospitable. We're called to look out for other people. We're called to serve, right? And what the current system encourages is actually one that's kind of counter to what we believe as Christians we should do, right? So the current mindset is, I pay my taxes, the government provides a program to the people that are down and out, and problem solved, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as long as I go to work and I spend my money on my stuff for my family and I give my taxes to the government will take care of the people that are the lowly in society, right? That might not have the means to take care of themselves, right? But really, there's a higher calling for Christians, and we have to be examples. But that behavior of go to work, take care of your family, and then also go down the street and take care of someone else is not really incentivized when you say, hey, you know what? There's welfare. there's all these programs in place, and you just pay taxes and, take care of it. You're kind of just voting with your dollars for some guy who's just going to create a program and take care of those people for you. Right. So there's some deeper stuff here we could talk about, maybe not on this show, but
but it's interesting because we pay, relatively high taxes in Canada, and most people are okay with that because you've got universal health care, you've got welfare, social services, because it goes to good things. But what do we see? We have a housing crisis all across Canada, and especially in Southern Ontario. If the government was being responsible and doing what they said they would do, we wouldn't have a housing crisis. What are we seeing? Organizations like Indwell and other organizations, Christian organizations, that are providing housing. And, it's not all Christian organizations, but there's other charitable ones that are not. But we're seeing private citizens identify a problem and then step in to solve that. And the government will sort of step in at the tail end of, of the announcement of a new housing unit that's been entirely built with private money. And maybe the government helped them qualify for a better financing rate or something, right? Yeah. But they'll step in and say, "Oh, we created 100 housing units," which is like a complete falsehood. Government, I don't think they've created one housing unit.
Meanwhile, those same government representatives are at every city council meeting saying, "I don't like this. I don't support it."
Yeah. Not in my backyard. All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But that's when you talk about the tax system, right? Like it's, if that was in fact how it should work, then we wouldn't have a housing crisis. People wouldn't need to support homeless people or people with addictions or whatever, right? But the fact is, the most support for those people, again, comes from the private sector, from private citizens.
Yeah, you really have to go above and beyond to help people these days with the incentives you just described. Like, you work hard, you earn a living either as a business owner or like as an employee. You take that money home. The government takes 20, 30, 40%, depends how much money you make, whatever. You take that remaining amount of money, you give some to church, to school, feed your family, whatever, pay your mortgage. Yeah. And then if you have any left over, wow.
And the more
fantastic.
They take,
go help somebody else.
Yeah, the more they take, the less the less you feel inclined to give, right? It's like, they already took. I just feel ripped off, right? And that's not obviously a good attitude, but that's what brews under the surface, right?
I know. So you really have to start thinking through these issues and get smart about how you pay your taxes and how you make your money, and just to be able to like help people out, which is not how it used to be.
Yeah,
which sucks.
If you think about,
we're gonna change that.
Yeah,
we're gonna change that.
Can we change it? Like, that's what we should get into. Maybe. Some tangibles here. Like, if say you're listening to this, right, and you're like, okay, like I have a young family, whatever. Like I got kids, I got church, I got school payments. Like you got all this kind of stuff. I agree with you guys. Real estate is a great investment. I would love to get in it, but like, I work this job. I don't think I can make a change. We don't really have that many savings. Like, how do you actually get in?
Yeah, well, so I mean, we've talked about with
like practically
young people episode. So you do need some money. Like that's, you have to save some money. As much as we hate, accumulating money because of inflation, you got to save some at some point. But there are creative strategies, right? You can buy a house. We see young people buying houses together.
Yeah.
So maybe you can't afford a $500,000 house, but you can probably afford half of that.
Yep.
Right? You can do a duplex, and you can both. And often it will start with your own personal home, but it doesn't have to, right? Mm-hmm. You could be renting and buy something. I have a family member that couldn't afford here, but they were able to afford something in Winnipeg. Or not Winnipeg, close in Manitoba, right? So they bought that and they rented that out while they were still renting here. Right. And eventually they moved there into that home. But it's just an example of like there are creative things that you can do. You can buy outside of your market. You can buy in the States, for example, where it is more affordable, or just in a different province, right? And kind of start your journey there. The important thing is to get in. Mm-hmm. And then you start taking advantage of these trends that we've talked about, right? Of using inflation to eat away at your debt, of using rising or debasing currency and rising house prices, right? Once you're in, now you can eventually maybe refinance that house because the value's gone up, and then boom, throw that money into another house. And that's typically the path that real estate investors take, right?
But you really got to educate yourself to do that.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
get a guy like Brent to help you out.
It is. So, but here's another difference between now and the 80s when it was more affordable.
Yeah.
There's so much more education available, right? Like the
That's true.
content that
That's
we're
fair.
putting out, you
Yeah.
can figure out how to do anything. And, maybe you got to work a little bit harder and do a side hustle. But on the flip side, these side hustles are much more affordable or much more available for people that are willing to work. And I mean, that part hasn't changed, right? You got to be hardworking.
Yeah,
that's a good attribute, and something that a lot of people are still, they were lacking probably in the 80s and they're lacking now. You can, I jokingly mentioned sneakers. We'll get to you, Ty.
Yeah.
I jokingly mentioned sneakers as like an asset that's rising, but like there's kids making money reselling sneakers, like making big companies.
Yeah.
Never would have thought of that, but that's something that's out there. And we've talked about flipping couches.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things you can do to make extra income, and the education, the possibilities are there.
Just as a side note, we did try flipping a couch. We got one for free, and then ended up on our driveway, and it got stolen.
Hamilton.
So
lesson learned.
Yeah.
I think Ty was trying
Go
to
ahead,
jump
Ty.
in.
Yeah, talk about creating value. The pricing just going up, but yeah, it doesn't sound like they're creating any extra value with the sneakers. But I'm curious, like, can you guys talk about? I know, like, there's lots of different strategies. Mark, you've done at Joy Hill, you do mid short term rentals, the Airbnb thing. Brent's doing more the buy stuff, adding units to it, doing legal conversions and creating duplexes, triplexes, adding all sorts of suites to different properties that you're allowed to do that with. But for a young person, or even, say someone in their 50s, 60s whose kids are getting, are leaving the house and they're looking to like help them out with something. What are some of the creative, avenues to do that? Like, I'm thinking things that people haven't probably heard of before, maybe like a rent to own, or even a vendor take back mortgage. Like, people know what those things are? And like, maybe just touch on a couple of things like that are more like in the creative and avenue, and then we'll send the listeners all over to learn about them on your podcast.
So yeah, we haven't really talked much about rent to own or vendor take back, but we could touch on them briefly. Yeah, so like our rent to own is where let's say you're looking for a house and you didn't have the down payment now, but maybe you got 10 or 20 grand. So I'll say, look, I'm going to take 20 grand as a deposit, a non-refundable deposit, but that counts towards your down payment. So we're going to make an agreement that in 3 years, you're going to buy this house. So you are going to pay me rent every month. And that's not, again, non-refundable, but we can count that towards your down payment as well. So at the end of 3 years, you have some time to save up and save up the rest of the down payment. So what you've been paying to me accrues as a down payment, and I can show the bank he paid, what's that?
A part of it, not all of it, right?
Depends on how nice the person is to you.
Yeah, how you structure it, right? So you could say, market rent is $1,500. You're going to pay me $2,000.
Yeah,
and the rent is just the rent, but that $500 a month, I still keep that. But at the end of the term, if you follow through, that $500 a month goes towards your down payment as well.
Yep.
And so if everything is good at the end, then we have a agreed upon price for the house, and we might increase it by 5% a year in value or something. And at the end of those 3 years, you buy that house from me. Mm-hmm. So I guess the sort of little known secret about rent to owns is that only 50% of people actually ever follow through and buy the house. So it can be pretty lucrative for somebody to offer their home as a rent to own, because they know that a lot of the time people aren't going to follow through. So that deposit is non-refundable, right?
And you're locking in a price too.
Yeah. And
it's like guaranteed.
Yeah. But it's guaranteed.
Like on both sides.
The reason it's kind of fallen out of favor is the rate of growth of house prices.
Yes.
Where people locked it in for 5 or 3 or 6%. But the house prices went up 10, 20, 30% a year, right? So in that case, they kind of lost, but it's a contract and you got to honor it. So great for the people who, and in the end, you still you still do fine.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, rent to own isn't nearly as popular as it once was.
Although
It
in
used to
today's
be.
market, maybe
Like
if you're
possibly, but everything is so uncertain that I
Well-
don't think anybody is really. I don't as an investor, I don't know if I would want to do that. Right, just
Yeah.
over
so
like a
much
2 or
uncertainty.
3 year term.
Yeah, you're going to go 2-3 years, maybe a bit longer.
Well, I think what Ty is getting at too is the creative solution aspect. So if you're a parent and you want to help your kids, there's a potential for some of these methods to be used as a way of doing that, right? Because you're not just going to buy a house and give it to your kids, probably, right? Especially if you have like 6 or 7 kids and you're, you know, how do I qualify for all these loans and do all that? So yeah, I don't know if we can have time or whatever to get into the weeds and all kinds of different creative solutions, but I think it is important to highlight that there are creative ways that we can help people get in that might not be conventional or might not be thought about, just like, oh, I have to work and buy a house. And oftentimes there is trade-offs, right? Like you're gonna trade off some of the equity to someone else, or you're gonna have to share the home with other people, or you're gonna have to spend a lot of time doing sweat equity and working and building up some of the value that way, right? But that said, like there still are options out there that could be considered, right? So
Right. Do you want to just touch on quickly what a vendor take back is? Compared to a rent own? Okay, fair enough. It's basically like you don't have the rent part of it, right?
Yeah, well,
or it's like a mortgage, the mortgage that the seller takes on.
Yeah, so generally speaking, this is where the vendor owns the property outright.
Yeah,
this is you can do it with partial ownership, but let's just say he owns it outright. So I own a place that's worth $500,000, and I'm going to sell it. Yep. So. And this is sort of the, you know, if you're talking about parents, this would be like using private equity almost. But the idea is, as the owner, I will take a down payment, and I'm going to hold the mortgage. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to take, let's say, $50,000 from you.
Yep.
And then we'll agree on a $2,000 a month mortgage payment.
Sure.
And then, you know, maybe if this is going to be an investment property, you want to have an exit strategy.
Yep.
So at the end of that time, you know, you as the buyer, as an investor, need to show me how you're going to pay off the rest in 5 years, for example.
Sure.
So whether that's a refinance and a loan from the bank, or you're just saving up money, or whatever it is. But essentially, the buyer holds that mortgage. So they have to have trust in the seller holds the mortgage. They have to have trust that the buyer is going to do that. So if you're doing it as an investment strategy, you need to have like a really good plan. If it's like a parent selling it to their kid, then yeah, there's more trust there. And there's tax advantages as well, because now you're not triggering capital gains tax on that full. Let's say you bought it for $100,000, it's now worth $500,000. As soon as you sell it, you've got $400,000 that goes towards capital gains tax. If you do a $50,000 down payment, okay, that might qualify for taxation, but the rest of that amount doesn't.
So at all, ever?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah, but you spread it over multiple years.
Yeah, because even the money that you're getting, that qualifies because they're buying it from you, but you're spreading that out. Yep. And so depending on your income situation and so forth, it can be a really good solution for someone who's built up a lot of equity but doesn't want to lose it all in capital gains. Mm-hmm, or again, for a parent selling it to their kid, it can work out for the parent. It's just like them selling it to anybody else, and the kids are going to pay a competitive interest rate, but at least it's available to them.
Right. So, but what if the kids can't qualify at the bank in 5 years down the road?
Oh, well, you got to figure that. Well, you can hold that mortgage forever,
I suppose. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're not too worried about it, then the parent could just hold it for whatever time, or they could take a partner.
Yep.
Right?
You can get creative with it.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of and partnerships are one of the more creative ways that we've seen for young folks to get into the market now. Because as soon as you have a partner, right, you drop your liability 50%. That makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Do you have some general numbers for people? Like I've been told, generally, if you have no debt, 5x your income is what you'd be approved for, without any other sort of info on the table. this was like 2 or 3 years ago when I was getting to place.
Yeah, I don't know. Talk to a mortgage
Talk
broker.
to a mortgage broker.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because they do have the stress testing and whatnot, right? So
Yeah, that would have changed because the stress test is 2% above current rates, and current rates are
very high.
loco.
Mm-hmm.
Which historically, I guess, they're not that high, but from
Yeah, hopefully we don't hit the 80s or whatever that wasn't.
Yeah.
Like
Well, everybody cites the
Or high
80s,
teens.
but if you do the average, we're actually, I think, probably close to or above the average of the last
Right.
50 years, the 80s notwithstanding.
interesting.
So,
So
yeah.
hopefully come
And
back
again,
down.
that price to income ratio is skewed. So,
Okay, so I don't know. It comes down to education at the end of the day, really. Get to know the market better, get to know real estate better, and do what you can to get in because it's a sound and stewardly use of your money.
yeah, the education is so freely available. And you want to talk about being a steward, like I say, it's so freely available that it would be unstewardly not to take advantage of it.
squanders.
There's no reason you can't
Squandrous?
find out for
Squanderly?
free, lots of free resources about real estate and about investing.
Yeah.
I mean, about anything, but especially in what we're talking about. It's all out there. So educate yourself. Absolutely.
Don't bury your head in the sand. Use your
Yeah.
talents.
You
Yeah.
said it, Lucas.
Yeah. Right on. Well, anything you guys want to close off with or plug or anything before we're done?
Well, just to wrap up with that too, financial literacy is readily accessible. It's also important, but so is action and doing something too, right? Because you can learn all you want, but if you don't actually apply it to anything, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's very true for finances, especially, right? Because in real estate, as with like a lot of investments with business as well, it takes time. So the longer that you kind of postpone and, analyze or look at what you're doing, maybe you get a little bit smarter, but the best thing to do is to start learning by taking action, actually make some mistakes. I've made so many mistakes and I still make mistakes. They're just probably different ones because I've learned from the other ones, but yeah, like you're not going to figure it out until you actually go to the bank and tell them you want this. And they're like, what? It's like, well, I heard it on a podcast. And they're like, oh, okay.
You're one of those guys.
Yeah, you read it on YouTube, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
here's
we've
the
got
loan. Okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you know Brent and Mark. Yeah. Okay. You're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say like you have to do everything with prayer.
Yeah.
Right. Examine your motives. We're in the real estate space. We talk about money and real estate all the time, and it's easy to get sucked into consumerism and just worshiping money.
Yeah.
Right. But really examine your motives and make sure you're coming from the right place. And the way to do that is read your Bible. So that's like the first step of real estate investment. Read your Bible.
Yeah.
It's the first step of anything, right? And then pray about it, and make sure that your heart, like God wants your heart, make sure that is in the right place, and that wherever you are in your journey, that you're continually refocusing on God and on the work of the kingdom. Because if you're given gifts and you're whether it's financial or other talents, they're gifts. We always forget that, right? Like I work hard for my money. I made money. It's mine. It's not yours. God gave it to you. I don't care if you work 60 hours a week or 80 hours a week for it. It's God gave that to you, and it's for you to use as a steward. That's the whole allegory of the steward, right? It's not yours. So use it wisely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess just to plug our podcast, which is why we're in the same room together.
That would be very wise to do, Brent.
Yes. So we have committed ourselves to kind of continuing this education. We're obviously on a learning journey ourselves. We don't have all the answers, but we love to ask each other questions and learn. And we read a lot, we listen a lot, study a lot. So at some point we probably plan to have guests on. But yeah, the podcast is called The Two Stewards Show. You can find it wherever, and probably add it to this. And
Sure. Yeah. You got social media?
Yeah, and then I don't think we have a social media for the podcast, but if anybody wants,
You post videos sometimes.
I post videos on
Hey, I'm in a
Good
house.
Stewards page.
I'm building
Yeah,
this.
so
What's going on?
you can follow myself, Brent, like Good Stewards, goodstewards.ca. You can find our social media there. and follow what we're doing. And we're always happy to chat. Like we definitely have people down to the office and discuss if there are any questions or stuff that comes up. Then it's exciting for us to help people. So
good stuff. Well, thanks everyone for listening to the show. Thanks for you guys for coming on.
Yeah,
it's been a blast. Honestly, it's been a lot of fun. It's an important topic. I think a lot of people care about real estate, and hopefully, you guys have educated a few people today. And like you said, if people want to learn more, Good Stewards Show, fantastic resource.
Two Stewards Show.
Sorry, Good Stewards is the company. Two Stewards Show is the.
And his company is
Joy Hill.
Joy Hill.
Yeah,
you can Google it.
Just Google me. I'll show up. Right on. Oh, and I should give a plug for RP too. A couple editions ago, they talked a lot about housing. I believe you were quoting that, Brent. If not, I don't know, Mark, yourself as well, or
no,
it was
just
more
Brent.
just Brent.
He's the
resident expert.
No. We have to write a letter back to them too, because they kind of made a few mistakes. So.
Oh, okay. Hey,
forthcoming
breaking news. All right,
rebuttal.
Stay tuned for that rebuttal. Yeah, hot off the presses.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas.
Yeah, no, good stuff. All right, well,
thank you very much.
Until next time, folks, keep having real talk. We'll catch you then.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Just a quick shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Redeemer University. You could check them out at redeemer.ca. Thanks to them for making this episode possible.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen or watch the show. If you want to send us your feedback, and we'd love to hear it, please email us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. If you want to find us online or social media, we got a lot of great content there. Just search Reformed Real Talk and we should come right up. This show is created and produced by myself, Lucas Holtfluer, and Tyler Vanderwoude, and our wonderful podcast manager who does all the editing is Mariah Tamiga. So we're really thankful for her contribution to the show as well. That's all for now, folks. Thanks for watching or listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.